The Russian economy is currently undergoing a stress test that makes a tightrope walk look like a casual Sunday stroll.
A very, very stressful stroll.
We're looking at a system under massive, just unprecedented strain yet. The tanks are still rolling. The missiles are still flying.
So the central tension we need to explore today is actually pretty simple, even if the answer is complex.
It is.
We need to figure out, is the Russian economy a house of cards about to collapse, or has it been effectively rewired to survive indefinitely?
That is the multi-billion-dollar question. And to answer it, we have to look past the top-line GDP numbers.
Because they can be so misleading.
Incredibly misleading in a war economy. I mean, building a tank counts as production even if that tank gets blown up a week later. It adds nothing to the wealth of the nation.
Right.
So to get the real picture, we need to look at the mechanics of survival. We're going to be talking about the price of a single barrel of oil, the cost of a loaf of bread in Moscow, and a high-stakes game of hide-and-seek happening on the high seas with the Shadow Fleet.
And we got a serious stack of reports on the desk today to help us navigate this. We're pulling insights from economic analyses of the 2025 fiscal year, some pretty intense incident reports on recent naval interceptions from the U.S. and French navies, plus assessments from the Carnegie Endowment and the Royal United Services Institute.
Heavy hitters. These are the folks who really track the flow of money and material.
Absolutely. So let's start with the lifeblood, the engine room of the Russian economy, oil.
Right.
For decades, this has been the thing keeping the lights on in the Kremlin. But looking at the numbers from last year, the engine is doing more than sputtering. It sounds like it's grinding gears.
It is misfiring badly. Russian oil and gas revenue fell by almost a quarter in 2025.
A quarter.
Yeah, just think about that for a second in terms of a household budget. You're fighting a war that costs roughly $170 billion a year, an astronomically expensive endeavor, and suddenly 25% of your paycheck just evaporates. That is a panic-inducing drop.
That is a massive chunk of change to lose. And looking at the sources, it seems like this isn't just bad luck. It's a squeeze coming from two different directions at once.
It is.
You've got the macro stuff, OPEC increasing production, which naturally drops prices. But then you've got this geopolitical curveball, the Trump-Venezuela factor.
This is a fascinating ripple effect, and it really shows how interconnected the global energy market is.
I mean, we've all been watching the news.
Right, about Donald Trump's recent moves to assert control over Venezuela's oil rigs. Now, put the politics of that aside for a moment, whether you agree with it or not, and just look at the physics of the market. Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves in the world.
Which have been largely offline or sanctioned for a long time.
Exactly. But if this move puts millions of new Venezuelan barrels onto the global market.
Supply goes up, price goes down.
Yeah.
Basic Econ 101.
Drastically. Markets hate uncertainty, but they love supply when it comes to driving costs down. So Russia is looking at a flooded market. But here's the kicker. It's not just about the global price dropping.
Yeah.
It's about the price Russia can actually command for its specific oil.
Because they're selling distressed assets, basically. They don't have the same access to buyers that Saudi Arabia or Norway has.
Right. Let's look at the spread. In August of last year, Russian oil was selling for about $57 a barrel. Painful, considering where it was pre-war, but manageable.
Okay.
By December 2025, that average price had crashed to $39 per barrel.
$39.
$39. No budget planner in the Kremlin built their spreadsheets for $39. That's break-even territory, or even a loss, depending on the well.
And that's due to the price cap and the fact that buyers know they have all the leverage, right?
It is. Because there's a global oversupply, major buyers like India or China can look at Moscow and say, look, dealing with you is a headache.
We have compliance issues.
We've got shipping risks. If you want us to buy your oil instead of Venezuelan or Saudi oil, you need to give us a massive discount. And Russia, desperate for cash flow to fund the war, has to say yes. They're price takers, not price makers.
But there's another layer to this squeeze, isn't there? The sources call it kinetic economic warfare, which
sounds like a very polite euphemism for blowing things up.
it's a polite way of saying exactly that. Since November 2025, Ukraine has shifted tactics significantly. They aren't just hitting ammo dumps or trench lines anymore. They're using long-range drones to strike refineries deep inside Russia and targeting tankers in the Black Sea. I remember reading about the fuel ban recently. It seemed incredibly ironic at the time.
It was deeply ironic, but it shows how effective the strategy is. The strikes caused such a fuel crisis inside Russia. And remember, this is an energy superpower we're talking about.
Right.
That the Kremlin had to temporarily ban the export of oil products. They had to cut off their own revenue stream just to keep enough diesel in the country to keep the tanks moving and the tractors harvesting wheat.
That really highlights the fragility of the logistics. It's one thing to have oil in the ground, it's another to refine it and get it to where it needs to go while you're under fire.
Sure.
But Russia isn't just sitting there taking it. They've built this mechanism to try and dodge all these problems.
Yeah.
The shadow fleet.
Ah, yes. The Ghost Armada.
It really does sound like something out of a techno thriller. For anyone who hasn't tracked this, we're talking about this massive armada of aging, rusty tankers that Russia quietly bought up to bypass Western sanctions.
Ships with obscure ownership, flagged in countries you've never heard of, sailing without standard insurance.
A huge workaround.
It was a massive logistical workaround. At its peak, we're talking over 400 vessels. The idea was to create a parallel shipping network that the West couldn't touch. But here's what jumped out at me in the naval reports we reviewed. The fleet is shrinking.
Oh, really?
It's currently at about half the capacity it had in 2024.
So it's a game of high-stakes whack-a-mole, and the mallet is coming down harder.
Much harder. And the nature of the mallet has changed. In October 2025, we saw strict sanctions placed on Rosneft and Lukoil. That's the paperwork side.
Right, sanctioning the companies.
Sanctioning the companies that manage the ships. But the aha moment in the source material, the thing that signals a real shift, is that enforcement has moved from legal threats to physical interception.
Right, I saw the report from the U.S. Navy. They literally seized a Russian-flagged vessel in the North Atlantic carrying Venezuelan oil.
And the French Navy intercepted a tanker in the Mediterranean that was flying a false flag. This changes the calculus completely.
How so?
If you're a shadow operator, some guy sitting in a shell company in Dubai or Hong Kong, you can risk a fine. Maybe that's just the cost of doing business. But whisking a $100 million cargo being physically seized by a NATO warship.
That's a career-ending risk. That's bankruptcy.
Exactly. It scares off the shadow operators. And if the shadow fleet shrinks, Russia is forced to put its oil back onto mainstream European-insured vessels if they want to move it at all.
And the second they step back into the European insurance market.
The West has leverage again. We can enforce the price cap. We can demand transparency. It closes the loop. It forces Russia back into the system that is designed to squeeze them.
So the external revenue stream is being choked off. You've got prices dropping, tankers getting seized, and refineries getting hit. But I want to pivot to what's happening inside Russia. Because money's fungible, right? If you lose 25% of your oil money, you have to find that cash somewhere else to pay the soldiers.
You do. And this brings us to the domestic reality, which is weird. I like to think of the current Russian economy as being in a medically induced coma.
That is a vivid image. Unpack that for me. Why a coma?
Well, think about why doctors induce a coma. It's to protect the patient from trauma, to keep them stable even if the underlying condition is critical.
Okay.
The Russian government has insulated the economy from outside reality using capital controls, massive military spending, and subsidies. But just like a coma, while the patient is technically alive, the heart is beating, the GDP number looks positive because of war spending, the systems are not functioning naturally.
And the social contract, that unwritten deal Putin had with the people for 20 years, is starting to fray because of this.
Big time.
The deal used to be, I'll handle the politics, I'll take away some freedoms, but in exchange, you get stability and your standard of living goes up.
That was the bedrock of his power. Stability over democracy. But now, to plug this $72 billion budget deficit, which is the highest since 2009, by the way, that deal is broken.
Right.
Taxes are going up on everyone. We aren't just talking about windfall taxes on billionaires or oil companies. We're talking personal income tax, corporate tax, and even taxes on small businesses.
There was a specific note in the source material about bakeries that really stuck with me.
Yes, the bakery uproar.
It seems so small, right? Who cares about bakeries in the grand scheme of a war? But when actual bakery owners are causing a stir because tax hikes are eating them alive, it tells you the pressure has hit the street level.
It's hitting the cost of a croissant or a loaf of Borodinsky bread.
It's significant.
It is. It shows that the cost of the war is finally being transferred to the average citizen. You can't hide it in the sovereign wealth fund anymore. But there is another economic paradox here that confuses a lot of people, and I really want to clarify it.
What's that?
The ruble is actually strong.
Right, I saw that.
Yeah.
The ruble surged 45% against the dollar in 2025. Now, usually when we talk about economies, strong currency equals winning.
Sure.
If the pound or the dollar is strong, we think the economy is doing well. Why is that bad news here?
It's totally counterintuitive, but you have to remember Russia is a massive exporter. They sell oil in dollars or yuan, but they pay for their war soldiers' salaries, tank manufacturing, pensions in rubles.
Okay, so let's walk through the math to make sure I've got it.
So if the ruble is weak, $1 of oil revenue converts into a lot of rubles. The government can easily pay the soldiers and the factory workers because they're swimming in domestic cash.
Right.
But when the ruble is strong, that same dollar buys fewer rubles.
So a strong ruble means the government is actually getting less domestic spending power for every barrel of oil they sell.
Precisely. It's a double whammy for the budget. They're getting fewer dollars per barrel because of the oil price crash we talked about. And each of those dollars buys fewer rubles because of the currency surge. It burns a hole in the budget from both ends.
So we have a cash crunch. But what about the people themselves? I'm looking at the unemployment rate here. It's under 2%.
Yeah.
In any Western country, politicians would be throwing a parade for 2% unemployment. That usually means everyone has a job and things are great.
On paper, it looks like a boom. In reality, it's a symptom of a severe necrotic labor crisis.
Wow.
Why is unemployment so low? It's not because business is booming organically. It's because hundreds of thousands of working-age men have been drafted and sent to the front lines. And hundreds of thousands, more often, the smartest, most mobile professionals, the IT specialists, the engineers, fled.
So there's physically no one left to work.
Exactly. You have factories trying to ramp up production for the war, but there are no engineers, no welders, no truck drivers. This creates a desperate bidding war for labor. Wages shoot up because companies are fighting over the few workers left.
Which sounds good for the worker.
Short term, yes. But higher wages without higher productivity fuels inflation. And to fight that inflation, the central bank has had to crank interest rates up near 20%.
20% interest. I mean, imagine trying to start a business or get a mortgage with a 20% rate.
You wouldn't do it.
You just wouldn't.
You can't. It suffocates the civilian economy. You can't invest in a new coffee shop. You can't upgrade your machinery. You can't build a house. You just survive. The only thing that grows is the war machine because the government is pumping money directly into it regardless of the interest rate. Everything else withers on the vine.
Okay, so let's pause and look at the full picture we've painted here. Oil revenue is tanking. The shadow fleet is shrinking. Taxes are rising on every day, folks. There's a critical labor shortage. Interest rates are sky high. By all traditional metrics, this sounds like a disaster.
It does. It sounds like a collapse waiting to happen.
And yet, here we are, February 2026. The war goes on. The economy hasn't collapsed. Why? Why hasn't this house of cards fallen down yet?
This is where we have to be very careful not to underestimate the resilience of the system. We can't just wish it away. First, there has been a very successful narrative shift.
Okay.
The Kremlin isn't selling this as an invasion of Ukraine anymore, economically speaking. They've reframed the economic hardship as a war with the West.
So when taxes go up or prices rise, it's not Putin's policy failed, it's the West is attacking us.
Exactly. It creates a rally around the flag effect. It buys them patience from the public. We must suffer for the motherland. But beyond the psychology, there are hard numbers that still work in Russia's favor. We call the economy a junkyard, aging factories, lack of investment. But the macro numbers are surprisingly stable.
You're talking about the debt situation.
Right. Look at the debt to GDP ratio. It's under 20%.
Which is incredibly low. I mean, compare that to the US or the UK.
Even the UK. During COVID, the UK's deficit was 11%, and their debt to GDP is around 95%. Russia has very little external debt. This means they have a massive financial buffer. They aren't maxed out on their credit cards yet.
They have room to maneuver.
A lot of room. They can borrow money domestically from their own banks. They can burn through reserves.
So they have a savings account to burn through.
And they have friends. China is still buying oil, even if they're driving a hard bargain and buying it cheap. North Korea is supplying labor and military kit. This support network, however much it might be shrinking or getting complicated by sanctions, it still exists.
So what is the timeline here? If they are burning the furniture to heat the house, how long until they run out of furniture? The experts in our sources seem to think this is manageable, but uncomfortable.
The consensus among the serious economists, not the propagandists, is that the economy is stagnating. Growth is predicted at a tiny 0.6% for 2025, basically flat.
The what?
But it won't crash tomorrow. They can likely fund the war at this intensity for another 18 months to 2 years.
2 years. That's a long time in a war of attrition. It's a lot of fighting.
It is. Putin is essentially milking the economy. He's sacrificing the future health of the country, ignoring infrastructure maintenance, cutting education budgets, stopping long-term investment just to feed the war machine today. It's not sustainable for 10 years. But for 2? Yes, probably.
It's like stripping the copper wiring out of your own house to pay the electric bill. It works for a month, maybe 2, but eventually you realize you've destroyed the house just to keep the lights on.
That is the perfect analogy. And that brings us back to those peace talks in Abu Dhabi later this week. The diplomats know this. Ukraine knows this. President Zelensky said it explicitly in the notes we have here. Russia must run out of money for the war to start coming to an end.
So it's an economic war of attrition.
The strategy isn't a knockout blow. It's a war of attrition on the balance sheet. They are waiting for the wiring to run out.
So let's wrap this up. We started by asking if Russia's economy is a house of cards or a fortress.
And the answer seems to be that it's a fortress built out of cards. It looks imposing from the outside. It has thick walls of cash reserves and low debt. But the foundation, the labor force, the technology, the oil revenue is rotting away.
You've seen the oil revenue dry up due to that massive $39 a barrel price drop and the aggressive enforcement against a shadow fleet.
Yeah.
We've seen the domestic economy cannibalizing itself, raising taxes on bakers, drafting the workforce, and running 20% interest rates just to keep a lid on things.
And we've seen that while they have the reserves to keep this medically induced coma going for maybe 2 more years, the damage they're doing is structural. They are turning a modern economy into a junkyard economy, highly functional for war, but dysfunctional for literally everything else.
It really puts a different perspective on the news we'll hear later this week from the peace talks. When you see the handshakes, remember the spreadsheets.
Always look at the spreadsheets.
Before we go, we always like to leave you with something to chew on, something that takes this just one step further. And today, I know you've got a thought that's been nagging at you.
Yeah, here is the thought that kept me up last night while I was reading these reports. We've spent this whole time asking how long the Russian economy can survive the war.
Sure.
But consider this. The entire Russian economy is now structured solely for war. The factories, the employment, the government spending, it's all military. It's all geared toward making things that explode.
Right. It's a one-track engine now.
So, what happens if peace actually breaks out? If the war stops tomorrow, the military spending stops. The soldiers come home. But there are no civilian jobs for them because the small businesses were taxed into oblivion and the foreign companies left.
Oh, wow.
The factories lose their orders because they only know how to build tanks, not toasters or cars.
The patient wakes up from the coma only to realize their muscles have atrophied and they can't walk.
Exactly. Can a zombie economy survive waking up? Or is the peace actually more dangerous to the regime's stability than the war itself?
That is a fascinating and honestly slightly terrifying thought to end on. A regime that can't afford to win but also can't afford to stop. We'll be watching Abu Dhabi closely this week.
Thanks for diving in with us.
Thanks for listening.